Hey, so this video was meant to be made about 4 months ago, and I just never really got to it because of reasons, mainly school. But I finally got it done, and I hope you enjoy. Today, I'm going to be going over some DC Multiverse figures that I've found at Ross. But with that said, let's jump right into it. Starting off, we'll be looking at Ibarthon, aka the Reverse Flash. So, starting off, you can already see that he has the infamous McFarlane side eye, which my opinion is the same as most other people. I really don't like the side eye, and I think it's an unnecessary addition. While it does look cool sometimes, I just think that having it on figures, especially if you're just gonna have them in a static pose most of the time, doesn't work very well. But on occasion, it does look a lot cooler. However, I'd just preferred it if he had neutral eyes. But moving on to the rest of the figure, I will say that when comparing him to the Injustice 2 Flash, that I actually appreciate the fact that McFarlane didn't reuse most of the same sculpt. While he used a similar sculpt, because you can see that they both have similar statures with their shoulders here and body shape, it's not exactly the same. Take, for instance, the lightning bolt. Well, as you can tell, the lightning bolt for Reverse Flash is flipped around, but interestingly enough, his lightning bolt is actually a little bit thicker than Flash's, and it pops out a lot more. Another thing is that, as you can tell, he has shoulder pads and also forearm gauntlets here, compared to Flash, who doesn't, and that even goes for his knees and also his ankles as well. But even though that it is different, they do share some similarities. For instance, the hands, while they're not completely the same, I believe Reverse Flash's hand is a little bit bigger. It is in the same shape and has very similar sculpt, if not the same. And another thing is that actually on the shoulder here, you can see that they do use the same texture on the upper arms here as well. But looking just at Ibarthon now, or Reverse Flash, I'll say that for what it is, it's not too bad of a figure. If you need a Reverse Flash in your collection, this is not too bad. I don't think he's all too great, but he's not too bad either. My only real complaint is the fact that paint on this figure isn't the best, in my opinion. Although I do appreciate the fact that the silver is more bright, I think that a different shade of it would have made it look better, or even a wash. I think that's what it's missing. A wash would have made it look a lot better, because as you can see here, there's actually some sculpted damage and indentations for the layers, but I think a little bit of a wash would have actually shown more of those layers and made it look a lot better. And also, the main thing is that they just gave up on the back of this figure. Like, you could tell here that they painted all the red areas here, which I think actually look really cool. I like the fact that they went through painting this, but on the back, man, they just gave up on painting this guy. And the same can kind of go for the Injustice 2 Flash as well. But you can see here that he has his gold areas painted. But on the back here, at least they went to the effort at least painting the back portion gold. But the rest of his body down here is just completely left blank. So I feel like while they did do a decent job for Injustice 2 Flash, they just didn't care for a Reverse Flash because he's just missing paint completely on his back. Bare minimum, I would have wished that they at least colored the red here, or even the red on his, like, the back of his butt here, because I believe it's supposed to connect here, probably, but I'm really surprised that they just didn't do that. But yeah, overall, I think the figure is decent for what it is. One thing I really like is the fact that he actually comes with some effects. Now, these effects are the same as the Injustice 2 Flash. As you can see here, he kind of has this lightning ball effect, and Injustice 2 Flash also came with this effect. And he also comes with these two, I want to say wave effects almost, or swoosh effects. I don't know how you'd really call them, but this is Reverse Flash, and this is Injustice 2 Flash, and they use the same mold. And that also goes for another lightning effect that they both came with as well. And while I do appreciate the fact that they came with these accessories, I kind of wish that they came with other things, especially extra hands. I think it would have made it look a lot better, especially because putting these figures next to each other, I think they actually look pretty decent. I still think that Reverse Flash needs more paint, specifically wash, but putting them together, they actually look really cool. And you can have them facing off, and I think them having similar accessories works. I just wish they had that extra hands, or even just a little bit extra paint just to make them match up even better. But for what it's worth, I think that for what it is, the Reverse Flash is decent. Not perfect, but decent. Continuing the theme with speedsters, we'll be taking a look at Godspeed. So starting off, of course, you can really tell that this figure has a lot of sculpt onto it. You can see his arms, the inner portions of his thighs here, the outer portions of the thighs, and even the chest, as well as the head. The sculpt on this figure is amazing, and I love it. But starting off with the head, I think McFarlane did a really good job sculpting it here. It looks like there's a face underneath, and I love the fact that he puts this black trim over the lens, so it makes the lens for the eyes stand out a lot more. Another thing I like is the fact that McFarlane sculpted these lightning bolts right here onto his face. So even though this is a separate piece with, I guess you could say, the cow ears here, it actually looks like two separate pieces that are on a hood or a mask. So I really like that he went through the effort of doing that. Also, I like that for the rest of the figure, for all the different areas, they all have sculpt, and it just shows so much more layer to the figure. It looks like an actual suit with different compartments and different things put upon it. As I've already said before, you can see that on the shoulders and the inner thighs, it's more of this, I guess, gradient or bumpy texture compared to the rest of the suit, which is almost more like fabric. And what I love is that McFarlane actually sculpted the stretched plastic here. I didn't notice this for the longest time, but every time I see it now, I'm so impressed by it. I think it looks really good. It even shows the seam lines here for the suit itself, and I think it looks amazing. Another thing that this figure does really well is the fact that it actually paints the back of the figure here. You can see that on his legs. Of course, these braces right here are painted, and it's even painted for the lower body piece here and also the upper torso. Comparing it with Reverse Flash from earlier, yeah, he looks really blank from the back. As you can see here, Reverse Flash is painted in the front. On the back, they just left all the paint and decided not to paint him at all. Compared to Godspeed, this figure looks cheap. But continuing on with the rest of the figure, the articulation for this figure is actually pretty decent. It's a lot better than I thought it'd be. He can bend forward a decent amount, which is surprising because I'm used to McFarlane figures not being able to bend forward at all, and he can bend back pretty good as most McFarlane figures can do. However, the only thing that I think is preventing this figure from having even better articulation and also a better presentation is the fact that McFarlane sculpted the torso and also the, I guess we'll call it the diaper piece here, to be very odd, because as you can see here, what McFarlane was trying to do was add some layers to it so it looks like more parts of a suit. But I just think that it ends up kind of undermining his stomach here and makes the diaper piece more apparent, so it looks weirder. Another interesting thing is that if you were to extend his body like this, McFarlane actually ended up painting the lines underneath here as well. So it kind of makes me wonder why he would make this diaper piece as apparent as it is, because the lines are already painted underneath. I think that trimming this here would actually make the figure look a lot better. It also goes for the chest as well. While it's not as bad on the chest, you can see that he did paint some of the metal pieces under here. So I think that trimming this a little bit would have made it look a lot better. However, since the stomach is going to be covered, at least by the torso a little bit, it doesn't need to be trimmed as much. But definitely on the crotch piece, I would say that trimming is definitely needed. Especially on the sides here, as it looks really odd. And yes, McFarlane actually did end up painting the sides here. So that's another thing that I just found really odd. But overall, yeah, I think this figure is really impressive, especially for a Ross find. I never expected to see him there. He surprised me on how much he's sculpted, and also I think the paint on him is done pretty solid. If you could find Godspeed out of Ross, I'd say pick him up. Up next, we'll be taking a look at the Gotham Knights Robin. So starting off with the figure, you can already tell that it does come with the McFarlane side-eye, and while it doesn't look as bad as it does on some other figures, I do think that overall I would have preferred no side-eye. But moving on to the rest of the figure, you can already tell that his skin tone is very, very pale, and I really don't like it. I think it looks really odd, and the addition to painting his lips as well almost makes it look like he's wearing lipstick, and I think it's a really weird look, and it just doesn't look quite right to me. But moving on to the rest of the figure, I do like the sculpt. However, I think the paint is what really harms this figure. I like the coat overlay here and the difference in texture between this piece and also the under portion right here. But the main issue is that because it's not really a paint difference, it looks very odd. And also the cape back here too is colored the same as the rest of the coat, and it's not painted in the back here. So it comes across as really odd when there's no paint on these sculpted areas here. And I think that the cape is just too small. I know Robin sometimes isn't supposed to have as big of a cape as Batman, but it just looks really off here and just doesn't look right. I think it would have been better without the cape. But I will say that, to be fair, this figure is mostly following the game's design, so I guess that's more of a game costume design than it is for McFarlane. But one thing that I would say that looks like it's mostly McFarlane is the proportioning. It might just be me, but I feel like the proportioning on this figure is really off. I feel like his legs are really, really long compared to the rest of his body, especially his torso here. I think his torso just looks really small and just looks undersized. But for what it's worth, I do like that McFarlane actually textured his legs right here with different coloring and also different textures. On the knee portion here, you can see that it's a little bit more armored. It looks armored, at least, compared to the upper thighs here, where it looks like it's more of a cloth, and it's a slight difference in texture and has more segmentation to it. And while it doesn't do too much for me, I will say that at least it does give the figure a little bit of separation rather than the legs just being completely green. Also, I do think that's odd having these little bracers down here or like couplings because it does look really odd, at least to me. But moving on to his forearms here, I do like the design of the forearms. However, I think the plastic that they're made of is not very good because it's very flimsy and it looks like it could come off if you peel it. So just be careful, I'd recommend, in case you're messing around with the figure. But I'd say that it's not too bad, but it could have been much better. Also, I feel like the staff that he came with for his bow staff is very odd because while it does look like it like the staff in the game, I think it's just a really weird choice to give it to him because first of all, it is very malleable. It's not exactly stiff enough to stay in shape. I feel like a harder plastic would have worked better. But also, it doesn't quite fit in his hands as well because as you can see here, his hands are fairly small sized and on this portion here, it doesn't really stick there that much. But on the bigger portions, while it will sit in his hands, when you look at it from this angle, the staff just looks really big, and at least for the width of it, it looks like he can barely hold it sometimes. But I will say that for the most part, my complaints with this figure is mostly on the game design, or at least the game design for the costume, and not really on McFarlane himself. However, I will say that a couple things could have been done much better. So overall, I'd say this figure is decent, but it's not too great in my opinion. Up next, we'll be taking a look at the Arkham Knight. So I just want to get this right off the bat, saying that McFarlane obviously did not paint this guy correctly. He looks nothing like he did in the game, and there are plenty of people on YouTube that have repainted him, and I just want to say that those repaints look amazing. They're phenomenal. But for what it's worth, McFarlane actually sculpted this guy very, very good. I'm actually really impressed by the sculpt. As you can see here on the chest plate, just the chest plate itself, he sculpted the Arkham symbol here and the indentations, and even sculpted underneath here where it's a continuation of the stomach portion. And I really like that he did that. He put a lot of effort into sculpting it. I just wish that he had painted it correctly. But you can see there's even the little rivets in there for the chest piece. And moving on to the arms, he made the shoulder pieces and the gauntlets. I was really impressed with the gauntlets. He even did the little kind of sort of elbow piece back here where it has some mechanical workings in it. And he even included the zipper here. Now, I'm not sure if it was like that in the game, but the zipper here is a really nice touch. And granted, even though it's not painted, I think it's a really cool look for the sculpt. Another thing I really liked is the fact that McFarlane actually, while he wasn't able to put guns with him, he actually gave him pretty decent accessories. For one, he didn't really use a grapple gun, but I like that McFarlane included it because although he's not able to put guns with any of his characters, especially with the character that's the Arkham Knight who used guns, I'm glad that he gave him some type of gun accessory. Actually, now that I think about it, I think he did use a grapple gun at one point, but I think it was just for one scene. But moving on to the other accessories, you can see that he came with two, I guess, flashbangs or smoke grenades here. And I put one beneath his belt right here. I'm not sure if it's meant to go here, but it's a good place for storage. But I like that he came with these too. Although they're not guns necessarily, I do think that including them because the character did use them in the game was a pretty smart choice to give him accessories rather than just giving this figure no accessories at all. So I really do appreciate McFarlane for doing that. However, one thing that I have to know about this figure is that I think McFarlane designed his legs very, very odd. As you can see here, while they kind of look normal, you might see the articulation scheme right here, or the crevice, and that's because the way McFarlane did his knees was really weird. It almost has a bow-legged look to it. As you can see here, standing him up straight, you can see that his legs do kind of bend outward a little bit, and it even looks like that on the back of the articulation as well. You can see that the leg goes like this, but then it warps really weirdly. It could be possible that my figure is just warped, but I'm not too sure. It looks really strange, especially for the right leg right here too. And another thing I think is really weird is that it doesn't really match up with the knee pad at all. I feel like this could have been, the knee pad portion could have been extended onto here. However, it's not too bad, but I think that the bow-legged design of it does make it look really odd. Another thing is the fact that his feet, at least for my figure, are really loose. Like, they're able to be articulated. Granted, it is smooth, but it's too smooth, too loose. So sometimes if I don't have him placed correctly, the figure will fall very easily. But sometimes he'll stand perfectly. But it's that loose occasion or rare occasion where it'll get loose and it'll fall. But for the most part, he can stand up fairly decently. I'd just say that definitely check your Arkham Knight if you choose to pick this figure up to see if he can stand properly for you. But overall, I'd say if you can find him and you're interested in the Arkham series, I'd say he's not too bad of a figure. Next up, we're going to be taking a look at the Suicide Squad movie, Bloodsport. So, looking at the head sculpt, I think McFarlane did a really good job on it. It looks almost exactly like it did in the movie. The only inaccuracy is the color, and that also goes for the rest of the suit as well. It's inaccurate because in the movie, it was either a dark orange or at most a copper or bronze. So, making it orange was just a really weird choice, and it just really doesn't look quite right on the figure, if you ask me. But that doesn't take away from the fact that McFarlane did a pretty good job sculpting the entire figure, and especially on the head. I like that he sculpted the teeth here, and it looks really cool. It has that xenomorph look to it, especially with the front teeth here and the very smooth dome head. And I like the fact that he even sculpted the sides here that almost has like a tendon look to it, or a muscle look. So I think that's really cool. And that goes for the rest of the figure as well. McFarlane did a pretty good job at sculpting it. He did a good job sculpting the belt piece here and the gauntlets, and I especially love the torso and stomach piece here. My only real complaint about the torso is the fact that McFarlane tends to do this style with some figures, especially this figure and to the top of my head that I can think of right now, the Arkham Origins Deathstroke. He actually did a system where it's a peg or maybe two pegs, but most likely it's one peg that pegs into it while the outer layer acts as the vest piece. And although it does keep the sculpt, I think it really hurts the articulation. As you can see, he can bend a little bit forward, which is not too bad considering McFarlane standards. And he could bend about this far back, which is pretty good. However, I just think it looks really weird when he's bending back. You can see the opening here, and it has a really unnatural look to it. But I do understand what he was going for when he's trying to keep the overall shape of the vest piece. But moving on to the rest of the figure, I really love McFarlane's sculpt on the boots here. You can see that the boots themselves are colored pretty good. It's just a black plastic, but it still looks pretty solid overall. And another thing I really like is the fact that he actually went to the effort of sculpting the buckles and belt pieces here on the shins or the upper calves, I guess you would say, as well as on the rest of the boot as well. I think it looks really good. My only real issue is that it isn't painted in. So I feel like paint would have definitely helped on this figure a lot. For accessories, he comes with two swords here, and even though McFarlane can't give guns to his characters, especially Bloodsport, because I love the fact that Bloodsport came with so many weapons in the movie, most of them being guns. I like that McFarlane gave him these swords here. It was pretty cool. And I do think that it was lucky in the movie that he used weapons such as the swords here, because it gives McFarlane an ability to give him accessories instead of him coming with no accessories at all. And also, to my knowledge, the swords look pretty accurate. If I remember correctly, most of Bloodsport's weapons come from his suit, and I'm not quite sure where his knives or swords come from, but I think that the sculpt for it looks pretty decent overall. So I'd say if you find this figure at a Ross and you're either curious on the character himself or you want to add to your Suicide Squad collection, I would say get him. He's pretty decent overall. And lastly, we'll be taking a look at General Zod. So to start off, I want to say that this figure looks amazing. I love the sculpt on this figure. Starting off with the chest piece, you can see that they have the symbols and also the different emblems here. However, they also went out of their way to sculpt in these indentations here all along the chest and even on the side of the chest piece as well, which I'm really impressed with. I love the amount of detail that's been put in there, along with these crevices here that are just above the chest piece right here. And I love that it looks like a layered piece of metal. Another thing I really appreciate about this figure is that, wow, okay, I did not know this was, okay, well, I'll just keep this in the video. So that came off. I guess it was loose. But, well, anyways, continuing on. Sorry, that really threw me off. But continuing on, you can see that they actually sculpted the panels here for his shoulder armor. And it looks amazing. I love the look of it. My only complaint is that it's not painted. I think a paint job on this would have made it look amazing. But let's take a quick look at the one that fell off here. You can see that on this side, it's basically the same, although it's a slightly different shape since it is supposed to be on the left side, but the sculpt work looks amazing on this. And as you can see here that, well, this is where it was originally supposed to go, but you can also see here too that they put the emblem on this piece of the cape here. And I'll say right now, the cape actually looks really good. I like the texture of it. The look is very good in a neutral position, which I much prefer over a dynamic cape. But I will say that if it was a wired cape or even a fabric cape, it would have been even more amazing on this figure. But going on to the rest of the figure, the sculpt just continues to be amazing. I mean, look at this crotch piece here and the leggings. It's like, it's not even armor, but there's still sculpt to it. You can see that there's almost like a diamond texture here, while it's a lot smoother, more towards the cod piece here. And then there's some bracers or some leather or uh, holdings on the side of the thighs. And then you go down to the knee pads. And I love this hint of gold right here. Or not hint, but application of gold. It makes it stand out and it brings a lot of balance to the figure. I think overall this figure is pretty balanced color wise, but I think the little details could have been applied just to make it look even more awesome. Plus, going down to the boots, I think the boots look amazing. Look at the texture on that. Look at the layering and look how mechanical it looks or how armored it looks. The different applications, the different parts, and it just looks amazing. I don't know how else to put it. I think that this figure looks amazing. The only thing that's really missing is a little bit of paint on certain areas. But going on to the gauntlets here, even the gauntlets look amazing as well. You can see that they have symbols on the underside right here, and even on the side of it, it has this panel look to it, which looks amazing, and it just adds more layers to it. So it makes it look like he's actually wearing a suit of armor. But now on to the things that I think are a little bit negative about this figure. For the most part, I think that while this figure is pretty good, the fact that his hands look this small is really weird to me. It just looks out of scale. I know that's supposed to be maybe him wearing the suit, so it's a lot smaller than the rest of his body, but the hands just don't look right. They look really small in his hands, or they look really small in his gauntlets, and it almost looks like he has baby hands compared to the rest of his body. Another thing is that the proportioning on Zod, while it's mostly decent on the top half of his body, the lower half of his body looks really, really odd. Now, at a distance like this, you might not see a big issue with it. However, I'll point out the fact that his arms go down all the way to the midsection of his thighs here. But if you know anything about normal human anatomy, usually it only goes up to maybe the topper portion here, a little bit higher above the middle. But his arms go all the way down to the middle here, and it gives him that like ape look almost, in the sense where his arms dangle down a lot more than they should. So I think it kind of throws the figure off a little bit, and the more I look at it, it actually kind of gives him a stumpy look. So I think that's one thing that kind of harms the figure, especially since, Zod is supposed to be Kryptonian, so they are supposed to be very strong, have a muscular build, and I think that the design of the arms here just makes it really weird looking. But I will say that for the most part, this figure is a pretty solid package overall. And I think that if you could find him at a Ross, I'd say definitely pick him up if you're a Superman fan, because I'm not sure if we'll be getting a General Zod figure anytime soon. And I think for the most part, as a newer design or a more modern design, it looks pretty decent. The only thing I have to add is the fact that I think that Zod had no reason to come with 3 sets of hands. Now, don't get me wrong. I love that he came with 3 pairs of hands. The open gripping hands, the pair of punching hands, and a pair of gripping hands for weapons or any other items. But this is so weird to give to this character because I think this could be applied to so many other McFarlane characters, specifically Deathstroke, or maybe even Superman, or, of course, Batman. I think it would work so well if McFarlane would apply more of this to more of his figures. So I think that in the future, if McFarlane could, and I think he should, and hopefully he would, maybe add extra hands to your figures. Especially because for the most part, Zod is a pretty good package overall, and the hands are amazing. But the fact that other figures haven't come with as many alternative hands as him is a shame. And with that said, that is my find for DC Multiverse figures at Ross. Overall, I think it was a pretty decent haul. I've been Figuristic Productions. I hope you enjoyed. I thank you for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next one.